I was a junior in high school, and my school was massive. 3 floors, countless hallways, and still somehow too crowded for comfort. To handle the overflow of students and classes, they tucked 2 classrooms away in the basement. Everyone called it the pit. It used to be a storage area, and the school only remodeled it enough to make it habitable for students. The thing about the pit was that it had no PA system or intercom, which meant we'd miss any school announcements. That wasn't usually a problem, but our teachers were sometimes just as clueless about what was happening upstairs. It was a gloomy Tuesday when my last class took me down to the pit for a history quiz. I finished it quickly, then texted my friend Aaron, who was in the other basement classroom, telling him to meet me in the bathroom. Our usual spot. No one ever used it. Aaron met me there, and we joked around, laughing at how weird and isolated the pit felt. It was like we were miles away from everyone else. Just as we were about to head back, Aaron's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and then looked up at me with wide eyes. Dude, lockdown. At first, we grinned, thinking we'd scored a few extra minutes to ourselves. If we couldn't hear the announcements down here, our teachers probably didn't know we were gone. So, naturally, we decided to sneak up to the main floor and explore. As we crept up the basement stairs, we found the hallway lights completely off. Usually they'd leave them on during lockdowns. The hall was pitch black with only a faint glow from the exit signs. The silence was thick, and for the first time I felt a chill. I whispered to Aaron that maybe we should go back, but he just grinned and kept walking. Then, suddenly, Aaron froze. I followed his gaze, and down the dark corridor, we saw a figure, just standing there. At first I thought it might be a janitor, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized this man wasn't dressed like anyone from the school. His clothes were disheveled, his posture tense. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I tugged at Aaron's sleeve, and we both quickly turned back toward the pit. When we reached the bottom of the stairs, we bolted into the bathroom and turned off the light. We crouched in the last stall, barely breathing, hearts pounding. The basement had always been quiet, but now it felt suffocating. Then we heard faint footsteps echoing down the hallway outside. The sound grew louder, until it stopped, right outside the bathroom door. My stomach twisted, and I clenched my fists, silently begging for whoever it was to just go away. Suddenly, the door creaked open. A sliver of light sliced through the darkness, only to disappear as the door clicked shut again. Heavy, uneven breathing filled the room, and it was getting closer. Aaron gripped my arm, his hand cold and clammy. We stayed still, hidden in the shadows, too terrified to move or make a sound. The breathing stopped right outside our stall, and then a low, gruff voice whispered, "I know you're in here." I felt Aaron tense beside me, and my heart thundered in my chest. The man outside started jiggling the door handle, frustration building with each attempt. I gestured to Aaron, urging him to follow me as I slid beneath the stall's dividing wall, praying the stranger wouldn't hear us. Then, suddenly, he started banging on the stall door we'd just vacated. His fists slammed against it with terrifying force, the metal groaning under the impact. Without thinking, we crawled to the next stall, and then the next, inching closer to the bathroom door. We barely had time to scramble to our feet before the stall door burst open behind us. We didn't look back. We bolted out of the bathroom, sprinting down the hallway and back to the basement classrooms. Aaron's classroom was closer, and we pounded on the door, pleading for someone to let us in. Finally, his teacher opened it, her face pale as we stumbled inside. She locked the door behind us, and we could see everyone huddled in the corner, their faces mirroring our own fear. The banging continued in the hallway, and we could see the man's silhouette as he passed the window, shaking the doorknob violently before stopping to peer through the narrow glass pane. His eyes locked onto mine, and I'll never forget the wild, unhinged look in them. He pressed his face to the glass as if trying to memorize each of our faces. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall and up the stairs. The rest of the lockdown felt like an eternity. We sat in silence, barely daring to breathe, and the teacher would occasionally glance at the door, her hands trembling. When the lockdown was finally lifted, we were escorted out of the school by the police. They took our statements and promised to check the security footage. But later, we found out none of the cameras in the pit had been working that day, and they never caught the guy. After that incident, the school added more security and rumors spread about who the man was and what he wanted. But even now, I can still hear his voice whispering, "I know you're in here," echoing in my mind.
The worst call I ever received was during my 20 years as a police officer in New Jersey. It was a school lockdown, an ordinary middle school, the name of which I'll keep anonymous for legal reasons. I'll never forget that day, though. The sky was dark, heavy clouds looming over the town. Rain pounded against my windshield as I pulled into the parking lot, my heart already sinking at the sight of the ominous white van parked near the school's back door. I was informed over the radio that a suspicious man had been seen stepping out of that van, disappearing into the school through the boys' locker room entrance. And now, the school was locked down. I parked next to the van, noting that all doors were shut tight, locked. Whatever this man had planned, he had planned it carefully. With a steadying breath, I grabbed my flashlight, stepping out of my cruiser and into the downpour. As I opened the back door of the school, stepping into a dimly lit hallway, an unnatural stillness greeted me. The overhead lights were off, the darkness broken only by the thin beam of my flashlight. Shadows stretched down the hall, twisting with every step I took. It was there in the lobby that a woman emerged from the shadows, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. She was a school administrator and spoke in a low, trembling whisper. "He's in the boys' locker room," she said. "Be careful. He might be armed." I radioed for backup, though dispatch assured me that help was already on its way. But in that moment, it felt like I was completely alone. I moved slowly, carefully, back down the hall toward the boys' locker room. Every step echoed, the silence oppressive, heavy. The closer I got, the more I noticed an odd, muffled noise coming from inside, a series of faint scratching sounds, little metallic dings against the lockers. It was as if someone or something was lurking in the dark, just out of sight. I took a deep breath and stepped through the locker room door, which squeaked ominously as it closed behind me. The room was pitch black, save for the narrow beam of my flashlight. I raised my weapon, moving in slow, deliberate steps, scanning the rows of lockers, each shadow threatening to spring to life. The noise was closer now, an erratic scratching echoing through the darkness. My hand tightened around my flashlight, my pulse hammering in my ears. This was the moment I was supposed to announce myself, to shout, "Police." But the truth? I was afraid. Something was very, very wrong here, and every instinct told me to stay silent. I inched forward, each step filled with dread, the room eerily quiet, except for that rhythmic scratching. As I moved deeper into the room, the sound would shift, bouncing from one corner to another, as though someone was playing a sick game. Then, from behind a row of lockers, a loud slam shattered the silence. My heart leapt into my throat, and for a split second I froze, my mind racing. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept toward the source of the noise, which led me into a smaller room, the football team's locker room. The lockers here loomed larger, shadows stretching across their frames like gaping mouths. It was there that I finally made my presence known. I shouted, "Police!" My voice reverberated through the silence, and then I heard it, a muffled cry. "Help! Someone! Help me!" It was the voice of a child, faint and desperate, echoing from somewhere close. I moved swiftly, weaving between the lockers until I found the source, a single locker door, rattling as a small fist pounded from inside. A sick feeling washed over me as I realized that someone had trapped a boy inside. I could hear his panicked breathing, his voice wavering with fear. "Hang on," I told him, trying to keep my own voice steady. "I'm getting you out of here." But just then, a thought struck me. I had seen that white van, parked just outside. I turned and bolted back down the hallway, my footsteps ringing out in the quiet, my mind racing. If I was fast enough, I could still catch him. I burst through the back door, heart pounding as I scanned the lot. The van. It was gone. Cursing under my breath, I radioed dispatch, alerting them to be on the lookout for a white van, but I couldn't shake the dread settling in my stomach. I hadn't checked the plates. I'd lost him. Whoever he was, he'd had just enough time to vanish into the storm. Without wasting another second, I rushed back into the school, heading straight for the front office. I instructed them to end the lockdown, to gather the students, and to send someone with a key to free the boy. My heart ached as I thought about what that boy had gone through, trapped in that dark locker, terrified, at the mercy of a stranger. When they finally unlocked the locker and helped the boy out, he was trembling, a faint line of blood staining his sleeve where he'd been cut. He could barely speak, but in halting words, he told us how the man had cornered him, knife in hand, trying to force him outside. The boy had fought back, his resistance saving his life. I stayed with him until his parents arrived, and even as they embraced him, relief etched on their faces, a part of me remained haunted by the encounter. For days after, I kept replaying it in my mind, the shadowed figure, the echoing footsteps, the rattling locker, and that van, just slipping out of reach. A week later, the van was spotted outside a convenience store. Officers made the arrest, the suspect identified without a doubt. But I'll never forget the look in that boy's eyes or the feeling of helplessness as I stood there in the rain, staring after that van, knowing I'd come so close to failing him. They say time heals all wounds, but even after all these years, I can still hear his muffled voice crying for help. Still feel the weight of that silence in the locker room, the darkness pressing in, cold and unforgiving.
When I was visiting a small college in rural Vermont, I booked a room at a cozy little inn nearby. It was my first solo trip. My parents couldn't join, and I'd just gotten my driver's license a few months prior. It felt like a small taste of independence, something I'd been looking forward to for a long time. The plan was simple: check out the campus, meet a few professors, and see if I could envision myself there. The inn I'd chosen was quiet, tucked into a corner of the town, and even a bit quaint. It seemed perfect. After an afternoon of tours and meetings, I grabbed a quick bite at a nearby diner and returned to my room by 8 p.m. I didn't feel tired, so I decided to take a hot shower and unwind with some TV. As I flipped through the channels, I noticed a strange noise coming from somewhere in the hallway, an alarm that I hadn't heard before. Then, all at once, the alarm grew louder in my room, accompanied by a pulsing red light that flashed from the corner of the ceiling. The inn's PA system crackled to life, repeating a message that made my heart skip a beat. Attention all guests, this is a lockdown. Remain in your rooms and do not open your doors for any reason. Repeat, do not leave your rooms. A hotel lockdown? I'd never heard of such a thing. My immediate thought was that there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe a drill, I thought, even though I'd never heard of hotels doing lockdown drills. I tried to shrug it off and resumed flipping channels to distract myself, but the alarm kept going, blaring every few seconds, making it impossible to focus. I checked the time. It was just past 9 p.m. Still early enough to call the front desk, I thought, and find out what was going on. I picked up the phone and waited, but then, as I held the receiver, the line went dead. I glanced at my cell phone. No signal. Odd. As the minutes dragged on, I became more agitated. I tried to calm myself down by reading, but the flashing red light made it hard to concentrate. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off, but I convinced myself it was just a minor emergency. Probably just someone causing a commotion, I thought. Then, just as I was getting ready to try to sleep, the phone rang. I jumped. The sound pierced the silence, making my pulse quicken. I picked it up, expecting a front desk employee explaining the alarm. Hello? A woman's voice, soft but with a strange edge to it, whispered, "Remain calm. Walk out of your room right now. Don't ask questions, just leave." There was something chilling about the way she said it, almost pleading. My heart raced as I tried to process her words. I wanted to ask what was happening, but before I could, she continued, her voice taking on an urgency that made my blood run cold. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "There's someone else in the room with you. They've been watching you. You need to leave now." Her words sank in slowly, like a drop of ink spreading through water. I glanced around the room, my eyes moving over the shadows, the dim corners. I took a step back toward the door, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. I hadn't checked under the bed or behind the bathroom door after getting back, and the thought sent a shiver down my spine. I stayed frozen for a moment, listening. I could hear only the muffled sound of the TV in the background, but as my gaze shifted to the closet door next to the bed, I felt my stomach lurch. The closet door was slightly ajar, just an inch or two, like someone had been careless in closing it. Through that tiny sliver of darkness, I saw what I could have sworn was the reflection of an eye, watching me intently, unblinking. For a few seconds, I felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. I couldn't look away from that dark crack in the closet. My mind raced, questioning what I was really seeing. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my mind was playing games with me after hearing the woman's voice. But then, as if to confirm my worst fear, the closet door shifted just a little, closing that tiny gap until it was almost completely shut. I bolted. I didn't even stop to grab my things. I threw open the door and sprinted down the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the cold tiles as I ran toward the lobby. When I got there, the night clerk was already talking to a few police officers who'd arrived on the scene. I quickly explained what had happened, and they immediately sprang into action, heading back down the hallway toward my room. One of the officers led me to a waiting area near the front desk. I sat down, trying to steady my shaking hands. The night clerk sat with me, her expression sympathetic but tense. She handed me a glass of water, which I gratefully accepted. I barely managed a few sips before we heard hurried footsteps coming from the hallway. The officer who'd been in my room returned to the lobby, his face grim. He motioned for me to come over, then said quietly, "We found someone in your room. He's been detained." I felt a wave of nausea roll over me as he explained that they'd discovered a man hiding in the closet, a vagrant who'd somehow gotten a hold of a master keycard. Apparently, he'd been lingering around the hotel for days, studying the building and learning how to navigate it. He had entered my room shortly after I'd returned from dinner and had hidden in the closet waiting. "He didn't hurt you," the officer assured me, "but it's good you got out when you did." I asked about the lockdown alarm, wondering if it had been some kind of elaborate trick or part of his plan, but the officer shook his head. "The alarm was just a fluke," he said. "The storm knocked out some circuits, setting off a false alarm. That's when the front desk staff noticed suspicious activity on the security cameras and called us." As the officer continued to talk, I felt a chill settle into my bones, realizing how close I'd come to something far more horrifying. The image of that single eye peeking through the crack in the closet haunted me. It was a reminder of just how close I'd come to danger, of how someone had been there, watching me in silence. The inn offered me a different room for the night, but I couldn't bear the thought of staying another minute in that place. I packed up my things with shaking hands and left for a motel farther down the highway, not stopping until I was miles away from that dark hallway and the unnerving memories it held. In the years since that night, I've traveled often, staying in countless hotels and inns, but I've never been able to sleep peacefully in one again. The memory of that man's eye peering out from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment, remains etched in my mind, and every time I check into a hotel room, I make a point to inspect every closet, every shadowed corner, and even under the bed, just in case.